In this tutorial, I'll show you how to create a glowing sword and laser effect in Adobe After Effects. So let's go ahead and get started. I have my raw footage up here, so I'm going to right-click that and choose New Comp from Selection. I'd already imported into this. I don't need the sound for this, so I'm just going to turn that speaker off. And then I can scrub through this or play forward in it, and you can see where I just kind of swing around this PVC prop. First thing I'm going to do is figure out where I want this to start. Let's say I want it to start maybe about here. Well, let me bring it up. Maybe about there. So I'm going to trim this just by shrinking my work area bar. So I'm going to pull that end of that blue line in, and I'm going to grab this one and bring that into about where I want it to finish. And that'll perhaps be my ending point. And then I'm going to go to Composition and Trim Comp to Work Area Bar. So now the only thing I'm going to see is that section that I trimmed down. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be creating a new solid. So I'm going to go to the Layer menu, choose New Solid. And I'm going to be making a white solid here. This is shot at 4K, so I'm going to leave that there. And if yours is black already, then go ahead and switch it to white. And I'm going to call this Saber. And then click OK. Now the white solid completely covers over my footage. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a mask and cut out that area where the saber is. So I'm going to turn off the eyeball on this layer, and then I can kind of zoom in and I can create a layer mask. Now the reason I'm going to do that is because I want to just show the white through. And this is going to allow us to create some motion blur as well. And it is a better effect to get that glowing sword look. So in order to do that, I'm going to get my pen tool here, and I'm going to click and drag. That's going to create a little handle or a node with handles. And I'm going to click and drag, and then that's creating a curve. And I'm going to click and drag and click and drag to the side of it. And that's okay if it's not perfectly lined up. And then I'm going to click. And now I've formed a mask. You can't really see that it is there other than that pink outline, but I'm going to turn that on. Now that pink outline for the mask is not going to show up in it. That's just showing me where my mask is. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. Then I can grab these nodes and adjust this. If you're not very good at this tool, the pen tool, you might try to use the Bezier game online, and that might help you a little bit. So I'm just going to make this, and it's okay that it is larger because I'm going to cause this to glow a little bit. So I'm just kind of zooming in and out, finding my spot, holding H so I can move around in there. And perhaps that works for this particular shot. Here is the tedious part. I'm going to animate that. Now you can try something like motion tracking or using the AI mask, the rotoscoping. But for this particular one, because there's so much motion blur, I don't think it's going to work very well, and we want to really get the right look. So I created that mask, and if I expand this and come underneath my masks, there is the mask. And currently it is set to add, and that's kind of what I want. And the next thing I'm going to do is click this arrow and turn on mask path. That adds a keyframe, so it says that is where this mask is going to be at this point in time. Once you've added the keyframe for that path initially, for that mask, what we're going to do is we're going to move forward one frame. You can find moving forward one frame here. Under your preview, you can click this button right here and choose next frame, or on your keyboard, you can press page down. Now I went forward one frame, and you can see my mask there. Now if I click my mask path here and I move it, I can actually move it where I want, but it's going to move as a rigid shape. And it's not the best thing to do it that way, to move it like that. Because if you do, then it doesn't have the perspective and motion blur and things like that. So I'm not going to move it like that, though I could record that motion with that keyframe. You'll notice that it already added a keyframe, but I'm going to go back, and instead of doing that, I'm not going to select Mask Path. I want to edit these points. It is a tedious process, but it is worth it. So don't click Mask Path right here, or that mask. I'm going to click to the side and just click the layer itself. Now, do not move these because that's going to be changing the size and shape of the layer itself of the mask. Now, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to click one of the points that I want to move, and then I'm going to move them where I want. And zoom out and take a look up here. Now it hasn't gone to the top of that yet, so I can go ahead and move forward one frame, pressing page down. If I need to go back one, I could press page up on the keyboard. And then just frame by frame, I'm going to animate these mask points. And I can adjust those. Like I said, it is tedious, but it's worth it when you do it. But do make sure that you don't have any of the sword showing through on the side. That top, I might just move it a little bit. And then I'm going to go forward. And even that it is a little bit, that it moves a little bit, it's actually going to help because it's going to create a little bit of motion to it, and it will seem a little less perfect. Also later, when we add a glow effect, then we are going to be feathering the mask, and having that little bit of extra is going to help. And then it will seem a little less static. So that's the process for it, and you're just going to go through frame by frame and animate it. And when you do it, do make sure that if there is any motion blur, use the motion blur. Actually get the motion blur. So I'm moving this up a little bit. And if it looks kind of like it distorts, you want to get that portion as well, the distortion that's created by the motion blur. And again, just frame by frame, frame by frame. So I'm going to go ahead and do this on a bunch of them. Okay, so here is the whole thing done. I skipped forward a bit, so I didn't have to show you the whole tedious process. But here it is. It almost looks okay, but there's a lot more to do on it yet. So what I've done is, what you've done, is you've created a mask on the white layer that you created, and it is kind of following along with all of the motion. Now, the next thing you're going to want to do is turn on the motion blur for it, and you can access that. If you can't see it, if you are in modes, then just click this right here to toggle the switches and turn on motion blur and make sure motion blur is on. And then you'll notice that it has a bit more of a blur now to it, and you're seeing that blur kind of with the background. But you might start to see a little bit of the prop show up as well. All right, after we've done that, what we're going to do is we are going to create a couple more copies of this. I'm going to hit Command D and Command D. So I've made a couple of copies, and that is going to help create the glow effect. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn the eyes off of those top ones for right now, and I'm going to come down to this and go to my mask path. I'm not going to turn the clock on mask feather or the stopwatch. I'm just going to go ahead and feather this a bunch. Let's try that maybe at 150. And then you can see it a little bit. If I turn that off, the background layer, so you can kind of see what that looks like. And that's creating kind of an outer glow. So again, it's going to depend on how big your clip is. If I just did something like 50, you're going to see it a bit more. But I'm going to do it in different layers. So I'm going to say maybe 150 for this one. So I've got a really big glow on that. Let me turn this back on. And then I'm going to start to add a bit more to it. So for that first one, I feathered the mask 150. And then I'll go to the second one. I'm going to feather this mask maybe only 40. So then that creates a bit of a glow that's a little bit closer. And you can do more of these if you like. You can duplicate it more times if you want. I'm going to turn that top one on. And then for this one, I'm going to feather that mask maybe only 20. And then we take a look at that. It looks pretty good right now, I suppose. And it seems like it's glowing. And again, I'm using motion blur on all of those. Next thing I want to do is color this. In order to color it, I'm going to create a new solid, and I'm going to create a black solid. And I can just leave it titled black solid for right now because I'm going to be crushing all of those together in something called pre-compose. And then I'm going to take that black solid and I will put it underneath. And then if I hit play, then you can kind of see that moving around. Next thing I will do is select all of the layers other than my background layer. And I'm going to right click and choose pre-compose. And I'm going to call this Saber Base. Click OK. And then I've got my Saber kind of just a white outline of it with its perspective and motion blur as it moves around on the screen. Now, in order for this to blend with my background, I'm going to switch my modes, click that button there, and then I can click this, and I'm going to choose Screen. Now, it's not going to look much different than it did before, but I pre-composed this because I want to color this. So, got my Saber Base, and the next thing I'm going to do is color it. Now, there's different ways you can color it, but in the effects and presets, you could do something like curves. And under color correction, I can just grab curves. This one might be a little bit easier for you to do. Right now I'm viewing it as art, and that'll make it red, or I can pull it down, that'll make it cyan. And I can adjust this curve as I see fit. And do some other effects. However you kind of want to blend that together. Or you can just click reset, work only in one particular one. If you pull it up, that'll be red. If you pull it down, that'll be the opposite of red, cyan. If I reset that, and if I go to green, pull it up, it'll be green. Pull it down, it'll be magenta. And reset that one more time. And then if I want it to do blue, pulling it up will be blue. Pulling it down will be yellow. Alpha will be the transparency, so I'm not going to be adjusting that. But I'm going to go ahead and reset that, and I'll go to red. I'm going to make mine, I think, kind of a cyan color. And that's pretty good. It could be done at that point, but I'm going to do a little bit more. What I want to do is I want to make this go up and down in brightness, so I want it to flicker. So in order to do that, I am going to take and duplicate this Saber Base layer. So I'm going to do a Command D, or if you're on Windows, Control D, and that'll duplicate the layer. Now I've got 2 copies of it. And then I'm going to add another effect. I'm going to add an exposure effect. And you'll find it under Color Correction, Exposure, and you can drag that to your top layer. And I'm going to collapse those curves there, keeping that on there. Exposure's on the bottom. But I want this to flicker. In order for that to happen, I'm going to use something called an expression. Or I could go in here manually and just add keyframes and bring the exposure up and down, up and down. But that would be also kind of tedious and not necessary. So in order to create an expression, I can hold Alt or Option on a Mac and click the stopwatch on the thing that I want to add the expression to. And you'll notice it becomes red like that. And then I have this thing that kind of looks like some programming. And these are expressions. And I'm going to type in the expression wiggle and parentheses. And maybe I'll try 12, 5. And then part of that is going to be the frequency of it, and part of it is going to be the amount of it, or the randomness, and then the amount it's going to change. So I'm not going to hit enter, I'm just going to click to the side, and you'll notice as that renders, it is kind of flickering on and off as I kind of swing it around. So it's getting brighter and it's getting dimmer. And it's kind of doing it somewhat randomly. Now the reason that I duplicated the layer is because I've got this Saber Base. If I just added the exposure expression to my top layer, or to one of the layers, then what's going to happen is that exposure is going to go up and down, and you are going to see when it goes down, you're going to see the blade through it. So that is why I duplicated it and then added the expression to the upper layer, so that even though this dims or disappears, it is still going to show the base through. Now I'll do a couple more things. Let's say I wanted to have a laser blast hit my sword. So I'm going to figure out where it is that I want to block the laser. Maybe I want to block it somewhere over here. So the first thing I'm going to do for that is I'm going to do Layer, New, and I'm going to choose Solid. And I'm going to call this Laser. Color doesn't matter, so I'll just go ahead and click OK. Now it covers over the top of it. That's quite all right. I can decrease the length of it, and I can adjust that a little bit later, but then you're going to notice that it's just black screen above. But I'm going to add a beam effect. So in my effects and presets, I'm going to look up beam, and then I'm going to grab beam and drag it down to my clip. And let's take a look at that. So what does beam look like? It looks kind of just like this red stick going across that. And you'll notice that it is made the background of that layer transparent. So that's why I don't check this composite on original, because then I'll just see the black. So it is making the back already transparent. Let me explain the beam effect a little bit. So this is the length of that laser beam. This is the time, so where and when it's going to be, or when it's going to be, I should say. So it was at 50%. I'm just going to go ahead and click Reset as I explain this. And then you got these starting and ending points. So if you cannot see where it is starting and ending, make sure that in your view you want to show those layer controls so you can see them. So that is your starting and that is your ending point. And those things can be animated. So again, let's take a look at that length, so we can increase the length or decrease the length. And then the time. So if I take that time to 0, at 0 time, it is at the starting point. And at 100% time, it is at the ending point. So I'm going to leave that at 50 for right now, 50% time, and then I'm going to decrease the time of that. And then I'm going to say, well, what color do I want this laser? Maybe I want it kind of an orangish color on the outside, and then the inside of it kind of real pale yellowish. And that's the laser beam. Now it doesn't have the perspective that I want to it. Also, there's starting and ending thickness. Now, if the laser is starting from out here, I'm going to take that starting point and drag it out. And I'm going to take the length and crank it all the way to 100% for right now, because this is going to help me figure out my perspective. And I'm going to figure out when is it going to hit in time. Let's say I want it to hit right here. At this point in time, let me extend that a little bit. So again, going to that beam effect, and I'm going to take that end point and say I want it to end right here. Now it doesn't have the perspective that I want it to have. I'm going to take that starting thickness because it's closer to the camera, and I'm going to crank it. So it's making it larger, so it seems like it's closer to the camera. So I have it out of the scene right there. Now the perspective looks like it gets a little bit too small by the time it hits there, so I'm going to take that ending thickness and increase it. And there I have it. Now it's not done yet, because you'll notice that it just shows up and it stays there. So I do want to find that point where I had it. So starting point and ending point. I also want to do a little bit of blending to this. So I'm going to take my layer for my laser, and if you can't see them already, I'm going to click that Modes button, and I'm going to choose this to Add. So it kind of blends in a little bit more, and if Add doesn't work for yours, you might try something like Screen. And you might experiment with it a little bit. But for right now, I guess I'll keep it on Add. And I am ready to animate this. So in order to animate this, now I'm going to take that time and I'm going to, or the length that is, and I'm going to decrease the length. And then I have to think, when do I want this laser to start firing? At what frame? So maybe I want that laser to start firing about here, at this point in time. What I'll do is I'm going to take that time clock, that stopwatch, turn it on, and I'm going to take the time now to 0. You'll notice it's kind of going backward. So I'm saying at this point in time, and I'll expand this so you can see the timeline, under Effects and Beam, and then you can see that I have that little keyframe there, that little diamond. So I'm saying at this point in time, I want it at 0. And then I'm going to push forward and see, well, when do I want it to hit? So at what point? At this point in time, I actually want it to hit the target or hit my saber. So I'm going to take that time and bring it to, not to 100%, but I'm going to bring it to about 70 or so. But again, it depends on your clip. So the laser hits and then it kind of disappears. It's almost like it gets absorbed and disappears. But that's not what I want to happen. I want it to ricochet off my saber. So in order for that to happen, I do need to make sure that I keyframe my starting and ending point. I'm going to turn on the clocks for my starting and ending point, and then I'm going to turn on my starting and ending thickness clocks. So it is going to be starting and ending at a certain place, and then I'm going to go forward just 1 frame. I hit forward 1 frame, and now I need a new starting and new ending thickness. And also I need to figure out where I want it to go. So I went forward 1 frame, and then I'm going to take that ending point right here, and I'm going to change the ending point to over there. And then I'm going to take the starting point, I'm going to move the starting point to where my ending point was before. So now I just went forward 1 frame, and now it jumps to there. But I only went forward 1 frame. And then I need to take that time, and I'm going to back the time up. Back it up a little bit. So now that is my new time, maybe at 2. Problem is my starting and ending thickness don't have the proper perspective. But I am going to use this about 21.1. So I'm going to put that in as my starting thickness. 21.1. And now the starting thickness is right. I'm going to pull that time up a little bit further so I can see it. Now perspective is still wrong because my ending thickness should be getting smaller as it recedes into space. So maybe I'll hit 8. And maybe I'll shrink that time down a little bit. So what we will see is it jumps like that. Now I need to figure out how long in time is this laser going to last in space, spatially here. And then I can take that time, and I'm going to take it to 100%. And then what I should see is I should see the laser come in, and it ricochets off my glowing sword. And if those starting and ending points are wrong, you can just go ahead and adjust that. Maybe that ending thickness is a little bit too thin for this, so I'm going to bring that up to about 15 and see if that makes it a little bit better. I think that works, and that's how you can add the laser effect. Now if you wanted to do it again, if you wanted to have multiple ones, what you can do is you can just select the layer, do a Command D, and move it over to another point in time, and then adjust those starting and ending points how you see fit. Because you already have most of the work done, you would just need to figure out, okay, where is it coming from and what direction is it hitting, and that's how you would add a second laser blast. But I'm not going to do it for this one. Now, if you wanted to add one more thing to it to make it perhaps a little bit more exciting, you can add a lens flare on top of where it hits. So I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to add a new solid. And I'll do another black solid, and I'll just call this hit. And then I'm going to shrink this layer down just to about where it hits. I'll get the exact thing that I need a little bit later. And then up here in my effects and presets, I am going to look for the lens flare. And I'm going to grab lens flare and drag it to my hit layer. Now I cannot see my background layer. That's okay. I'm going to change this blending mode, and I'm going to change that to screen. And then I'm going to place it where it hits. Now I do feel like that's a little bit bright, so I'm going to back off on my flare brightness a little bit. And what's going to happen is right now you can see it's already there. But what I want is I want it to kind of grow when it hits and shrink. So in order for that to happen, so I'm going to see, well, when does this hit? And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to add some keyframes. So I'm just going to take this flare brightness and I'm going to turn that clock on. So when it hits, I want that flare brightness to be at 0. And actually, I'm going to zoom into that in the timeline a little bit closer so I can expand that. Go to the effects, lens flare. There's my keyframe. I'm going to bring it back a little bit in time. So it's not exactly when it hits, because when it hits, I want to have that flare brightness be at whatever brightness that I want it to be. And then I'll go forward in time, and then I'm going to take that flare brightness and drop it to 0. So what will happen is when it hits, it flashes. Now if the timing is a little bit off, you might need to get in there and adjust those keyframes. You might bring it in a little bit, and it does depend on how much time you've got there. But it should be kind of just a quick flash. So it gets brighter and then it ricochets off. The other thing you probably would want to do is adjust where it hits. So right here, that's in the right place, but you'll notice that that laser beam has kind of changed its position. Either I need to adjust that ending point, or I could also keyframe that ricochet. So let's say I wanted to keyframe the ricochet. At the tail end here, I might turn the clock on for the flare center and put it here. And then I want to make sure that I'm keyframing it, so I'm working a little bit backward. And then I'm just going to leave that right where it is. So then what happens is it kind of ricochets off. And that is the basics to that effect. And if you wanted to add Foley, you could get an old CRT television and record the back of it with a microphone, and it creates a nice hum. And then if you wanted to create a laser blast sound effect, you could get an old Slinky and put a red cup on it, one of those plastic disposable cups on the end of it, and record that, and it will kind of make a laser blast sound. And that is the basics on how to create a glowing sword and laser effect in Adobe After Effects.